Welcome to another edition of Time for Forgiveness, the show that not only teaches you how to forgive, but also gives you compelling guests who share their stories on how they found the path to forgiveness. Now, please welcome your hosts. Here are Kelly and Bob Pascuzzi.
Please welcome Katie Chaney, and unfortunately, you have had the experience of getting to know what pain and grief from losing a child feels like and looks like in your life. And I just want to open it up to you to maybe start telling your story about your son.
Gosh. It seems like that would be an easy story to tell, but where to begin feels, where do you start talking about your kid except everywhere,
Katie, sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Maybe what we could do is just start with the day of the accident, and then we can back into some of the filler part.
Yeah. I think, like so many stories start, it was like every other day, I was standing in the middle of CVS when I got a phone call. And I was with my mom, and it was my husband, and I knew from the sound of his voice that, he asked me where I was, and I told him, and he said, the police were just here, there's been an accident, and we have to get to the hospital. And so he picked us up. We just lived right around the corner from there, so I was with my mom, picked us up, and the police had told my husband, they didn't know if he was going to make it. And so we were in the car, and the whole way to the hospital, I just kept praying, and I just kept saying, miracles happen every day. Miracles happen every day. Over and over and over again. And I think I kind of go into my own little shock again in the moment when I'm telling the story. There were hours went by before we knew what was really going to happen. And I remember seeing him on the gurney and knowing that they didn't know what was going to happen, but believing that they did know, believing that I didn't have all the information yet or wasn't processing it, and there was still hope. And so my son liked tattoos. So he had gotten one down the side of his arm that was a lightning bolt tattoo, which is something you'll see on a lot of our gear that we do for his fundraiser. And I remember saying to him, we can do this. You've done hard things before. You can do this. You can do anything. And I said, if you pull through, I will pay for a full back tattoo for you. Just pull through.
Wow.
So, I remember that. And then everything else feels like background noise. Like it just, I couldn't tell you what was being said or what was happening, except the moment that they said time of death.
It's almost like you see in a movie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, which is, it's classic trauma response, of course,
Yeah.
And that's what it felt like. Is I remember that there were family members that were able to make it down before that took place. And I remember that, so Paul was an organ donor. And his body, while he couldn't survive the trauma, all of his vital parts did. And so he was, I told you that the whole way down, I kept saying, miracles happen every day. It just over and over and over in my head and praying for it. And a miracle did happen that day.
Was that his decision, obviously?
Yeah, actually they said, your son even signed his learner's permit when he was, 15 years old as an organ donor. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it was his decision. It was on his driver's license that he was an organ donor. And I remember having those conversations with him too, because, I always donate blood, and I've got the, organ donor on my driver's license too. And I don't remember why we had the conversation, but I remember at one point having that conversation and knowing that even if he hadn't been designated, it's what we would have chosen. And it's what he would have chosen.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment, and there's probably another layer to this because Paul had a love for motorcycles and went through all the training, and that day it wasn't any error on his part.
No, that's right. So actually, he had only had his motorcycle a short time, and he had not just taken the basic safety course, but he took the full safety course. And I remember my own concerns in talking with a close family member and friend about it. And I remember him saying, Paul's not going to do anything stupid, because I know Paul, and the last thing he ever wants to do is to be the reason somebody else is hurt. Yeah. So he was very safe. He had actually just completed the safety course that weekend. And then everyone at the scene and everything that was reported said it was not his fault. He couldn't have done anything any different.
Katie, do you mind sharing what the circumstances were around the accident that day? What transpired?
My understanding is that someone in their car, it took place on Ward Parkway, 81st and Ward Parkway, and somebody was on their way somewhere, and they did not, they failed to yield. They just didn't look. They didn't see. They didn't look. And it was Ward Parkway at middle of the afternoon, so he wasn't the only, this isn't an untraveled road. There were other cars around. There was more traffic around. And it took me a long time to hear the circumstances, because when you're in that space, you can only take in so much at a time.
Sure.
But I also know that there was something I needed to hear. This wasn't his fault. Not that I believed anything different, but when I heard it come from some place of authority, there was a different response happened, I don't know. That's I remember that someone said they had been driving past that intersection when it happened, and they looked over and they saw someone kneeling next to my son and just soothing him. He wasn't conscious, but they were talking to him. She said, I saw this woman leaning over, and just, I could see the kindness and compassion in that moment. I ultimately received a letter from her. And there's just strange things that happen in the universe, when there's connection, and somehow this woman was connected to someone who knows me well, but she didn't know me or my son at all. It just, how the information came, they happened. I think they were members of the same church or something, and she overheard a friend of mine somehow they said, oh, that's my son, that's my friend's son, and this was the woman who was kneeling next to him, and we received a letter from her, and I still have it, and I keep it very close.
That must be at least a little comforting to know that this woman, I'm like, how could you possibly know who that was?
Yeah.
Number one. And then to find out you do know who that was, she contacted you. And I'm sure that must have been.
I didn't know her at all. She didn't know me at all. It turned out there was a mutual friend who connected the dots there.
Sure.
And the word I would use is gratitude. there's enormous gratitude for knowing that there was a loving presence for my son in that moment, for our son in that moment.
A blessing in disguise. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you are an eloquent writer, and I had read somewhere where you had mentioned that like one of the most important things for you is connection. And it's interesting we're talking about how that has connected. But I have found, and maybe I'm not speaking for you, but in my own personal grief journey, there were times I didn't really feel any connection because it was so uncomfortable for others, and then it made me uncomfortable to talk about it. And I'm just curious, the connection for you with others since your son has passed, what does that look like?
Gosh, it's a really good question because we were just having a little bit of this conversation, which is, I believe that connection happens through compassion, and compassion happens because of suffering. And so when we are willing to share our suffering, and when that allows somebody else to be seen, if somebody listening feels that their scene or their pain or their suffering is seen in this process, and it somehow allows them space for their own grief journey. I would say healing because that's not always a word people want to hear, and we're not always ready to hear that word when we're grieving. Then it's worth it. It's worth being able to share our stories so that we can find some type of connection, because I believe that is where hope happens, I think. That's it.
That's very powerful.
No,
and
that's
it's
very
a lot
profound.
to take in right
Very
there.
profound.
I mean,
So did I answer your question?
yes, you did. You did.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, since Paul's death, I know other people who've lost their children. And I say a child, he's 20 years old, but they're always your child. It doesn't matter if they're 2 or 20 or 40, they're still your child. And there is a sense of gratitude. That's not the right word.
Comfort.
I am drawn to being able. I understand the power that exists when someone can show up for you in a space of grief, because not everybody can do that, and it has nothing to do with who they are as a human being. It has to do with capacity, and until you've managed your own suffering, it's very difficult. Most people don't have that capacity when they haven't dealt with their own suffering.
Yeah, and I think that's the key word there is the capacity, to look within oneself, to find that, and because it's just not there.
Right.
I don't care how strong you think you are when you go through something that you have gone through. One of the things that you have done that has been a light through your son is celebrate his life and fundraise for his life. And you are an amazing ray of light yourself, because the minute I met you, we hugged, and there was just something, emanating from you that said, there's a gift here. And we started talking about you being a spinning instructor and how you're taking care of other people. So, you as a mother are moving on and trying to move on, and you're wearing your amazing son Paul's first fundraising T-shirt.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So Paul was a personal trainer. He worked at a gym called the Foundation in Westport. And when this happened, they came to us and said, we want to do something. How can we help? And we said, well, let's talk about what we can do in his name. Let's talk about what can we do to make, to keep his name alive. And so together we came up with this fundraiser called the Paul Chaney Fitness Fundraiser. And we are now moving into its third year of that. It's not really a year, because the second fundraiser was only like 8 months from the first one, just based on timing of everything. But we're planning the third one right now. And we just really wanted to honor the things. We wanted to have something where we could honor him that made where the community could come together, people who loved him could come together, community could come together and actually celebrate. Because it feels like so often this return to connection over a lost loved one tends to be more sorrowful and more like we're having like another funeral.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's just not what we wanted. We wanted celebration. It's not what he would want either. He would want to be like, where does hope live? Like, how do we create something positive in this and keep his name alive and give people something, a place to talk about where we're laughing and talking and celebrating instead of hurting and crying. And so Paul Chaney Fitness Fundraiser, we came up with that. The first one was the weekend after Thanksgiving in 2022. And we kind of threw it together quickly, but it was a lot of fun. So we have different fitness events. And we chose Casey Paws as the recipient of all the donations. 100% of the donations we raise goes to the organization. And Casey Paws is a no-kill canine sanctuary and rescue. But they have a doggy daycare. And we always took our dog to their doggy daycare. And actually, Paul's dog, so Paul lived at home at the time and had a dog, we have a dog named Alice. She's a little husky. And she was his. And she happened to be at Casey Paws on that day. And they kept her until we got home from the hospital. And when we started thinking about what to do, I went to Casey Paws, and Paul loved dogs. He loved animals in general, but really had a special place for dogs. And so we decided to find out what were their needs, because I knew they were a rescue. I did not know until that moment that they were a sanctuary, what I would call a sanctuary, which means the dogs that cross their path, when a dog comes to them or they rescue a dog, they are committed to that dog basically for its natural life. So a dog is not, and I'll submit corrections if I need to, but I know I don't need to. Unless a dog's natural quality of life demands it, that dog will not see euthanization. So there's no, it's unadoptable. There's no, any of that. They work really hard. They've had dogs that have been with them for years that might be considered in other venues might be considered unadoptable. And so I really support that. I love that avenue, that passion that they have to truly rescue a dog and to create a home. They're a smaller organization. They're month to month in how they survive. So when the Paul Chaney Fitness Fundraiser came along, it was sort of it was a next step for them into bigger fundraising. They had sustained themselves for a long time until COVID, and then COVID hit, and it changed I believe that's what changed the financial opportunity there. And so our first event raised over $30,000.
Wow.
No, I'm sorry, that's not true. Our first event raised $27,500. Our second event raised around, I want to say 37. It was 35 to 37,000. But the bigger part of it was we expanded in awareness of the organization and what they do, and we've been able to bring in and introduce larger committed funders.
Yeah.
And we're working on building an actual fundraising committee, a fundraising board to continue to assist them.
And by the way, both of those are wows, because that's a lot of money for a first. You said, and I'll quote you, you threw it together and just wanted to do something in his memory, which was amazing. And what a great organization.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad we're talking about that too, because that keeps Paul's memory alive. That keeps him generating. And also the miracles that we talked about earlier about organ donation.
Yeah.
And Paul is living on, through that as a giver, as, a lot of people should be. Everybody makes their own choice, but I love that he was an organ donor.
And Katie, if we can pivot back a little bit, I'm kind of curious, the driver of the car, so what's happening with that in terms of, this a situation where you've met this person? Have you had any interaction?
No. And I will tell you, I don't want to. Not because, not out of anger. It's not an anger thing. It is. I don't want to be walking down the street and have to acknowledge that. I don't want to. I think it's better for me to be able to have that face as anonymous. I spent a lot of time praying in my own way, especially in the early days, because it would be very easy for me to lean into the anger of it all, but I don't have the space for it. I don't have. I can't give that energy to anybody else. I don't have it. I have the energy to manage the grief of losing my son. I have the energy to manage what we're doing to try to maintain his legacy on this side of his life. But part of my prayers were, I have to wish that person peace, because I don't know what it would be like to wake up every day and know that I'd taken somebody else's life. It's not something they meant to do.
Right.
You know, it was a fault, but I don't know what they need to do to manage their life now.
I mean,
that's profound.
I'm not
That's
even
very
for
powerful.
sure what to say after that, because I'm just taking that in, because I know how you said I had to, but it's also you chose to offer that peace, because my understanding is that there is one charge, and it would be just failure to yield.
And I will say, so his time in court hasn't come up yet, and so I'm very careful about telling his story or putting a public conversation out there that that could be misconstrued, or I'm just very careful about that.
Sure.
I think that person needs their space to navigate what's happening for them now. So I'm really careful about that right now.
But the one good thing that you said, Katie, was that, you know, you need to wish that person, you know, acceptance. The fact that they can get up every day, they have to live with that. Mm-hmm. And you want them to have peace. Mm-hmm. And that says a lot about who you are as a person. And I mentioned that when we first started talking about when I first met you, I just went, wow, there's something extra special here.
Thank you.
So I have no doubt that everything that you do for Paul is going to be successful, is going to have so many blessings behind it, because that emanates from you. Mm-hmm. And thank you for being honest about your anger, about how you could easily go there. And I'm sure as a mother, as a father, as a person, anybody could go there, but you chose not to.
And don't get me wrong, there's anger, but the anger has a different direction. There's anger that this happened at all.
And I think we feel that.
Yeah, there's anger that, there's definitely, I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but I take the glass recycling to the recycling bin, and I turn the music up in my car, and I smash. And I smash. That's
your
anger.
outlet right there.
It's anger, and
It's a release.
and it is real, and it is expected, and it is part of grief, and it has a place in grief. It's just, where are we directing it in a place that we actually have some sort of control's not the right word, some sort of agency over it. Because if I direct it at a person, I have no control over it. And that doesn't make sense. So that might be something that we revisit.
Actually, it sounds like you're that's the big word I was going to throw out there.
Compartmentalizing.
Thank you. You're compartmentalizing it to, this is you taking care of you. This is part of your healing.
Yeah.
And you're doing this for you.
Yeah.
To keep that channel where it needs to go.
Well, what this says about me, or about you to me, Katie, is like you have a very high level of awareness. Because I think the first natural instinct would be to react, and to react in a very negative way.
Sure.
And
there were definitely some expletives when I understood what actually happened, right?
Sure.
There was definitely some words I won't say on air, and anger. And then there is the space where you say, what now? What now? And
Would you be willing to talk about the letter?
I haven't written the letter yet. I plan to write
Could you explain the letter?
the driver a letter just to say that, at this place in life, we have choices. And we can't change the past. I wish we could. So when we talk about anger, there's a lot of anger in many areas. And when I feel the anger, what I want to choose is how do I move with love? At the end of my life, what will have made a difference? My anger will not have made a difference. But if I can find a way for love and compassion to come in there, then it can be different. And this is not about forgiveness. I'm not saying I'm writing a letter of forgiveness. That's not true. What I would say is he's in charge of his own forgiveness. And as the mother, as Paul's mother, I can't speak for my husband. He has his story to tell. So he is a beautiful, amazing, loving, caring person too, but I choose to speak for myself right now. I would ask, all I ask is that this driver choose every day to do something that makes a positive difference. And if it's just smiling at somebody walking down the street, fine. If it's opening a door for somebody, fine. If it's something bigger, great, whatever it is. But you have a choice to be a positive influence in the world. We can choose to stay in our own pity party or whatever it is, or we can choose to do the really darn hard thing.
Hard things.
We have a censor button if you need it.
Okay.
You just say the word.
Just to really do the hard fucking thing.
Right.
And move out of that space. Because once you're there, it's not as hard as you think it's going to be. And it's always going to be, every day is always going to be hard for me and for my husband. But if that would be the one thing that I would ask, is I would say, do something every day, because that's who my son was. Yeah. That's who left this world, was somebody who wanted to be a positive influence in the world, to his clients, to his friends, to his family.
And would you say that was Paul's most redeeming quality? Or tell us a little bit about Paul, if you can, just for a minute. I mean, what would you want the audience to know about your son?
Thanks. Paul, he was an emotionally generous person. He traveled his own road in life. He had his own battles to fight, and he did. And he made choices. And on the other side of all of those choices was someone who wanted to stand up for the people that he loved, stood up for the things that what he believed was right. If he had friends who were hurting, family who was hurting, he wanted to show up for them. I think he wanted to be part of the reason that people felt good about themselves. That's what I believe about him. One of the things that happened for us in the wake of Paul's death, I think as a parent, we know our children, right? Like when you hold them that first time, when you can feel them, you begin to know who they are, and maybe even before that, and you watch them grow, and you watch them struggle, and you watch them make good choices and bad choices and all of these things, and you begin to see who they are, and you, at least for me and my husband, love and accepted him unconditionally. And I think I got off track with what I was saying, but you know your kid. And you hope and pray that the world sees and receives them for what you see in them. And that's a challenge for any kid growing up, right? Yeah. Especially when they're teenagers. It's awful. One of the gifts that we were given is that we saw that that's how he was received. That people experienced, his friends and other people experienced this part of him that we hoped that they would. This giving spirit, this the kindness, the friendship, the person who showed up, the person who said, "You're better than that. You can do better than that. Show up today." And I heard it from people at the gym. I heard it from friends who wrote letters, people who showed up. When you are an organ donor, a full organ donor, they have what's called an honor walk. So they people from the hospital and friends and family show up to usher him to the operating room.
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
That's what happened. I've seen it happen before, and it's what happened for us as well. I don't know if every hospital does that. I don't know. Midwest Transplant is the organization that managed the organ donor, and they are a part of what we choose to do in Paul's name also, in terms of awareness. But it's usually one floor. It was 2. And people standing outside.
Wow.
And to see people show up for him, for us, it's powerful. Oh, yeah. And you see and they do it for all kinds of reasons, but the conversations we were able to have with people who loved Paul, we got to hear that people saw in him what we saw in him.
It sounds to me, Katie, that you have an incredible support system of his family or his friends and so many people in your community that really loved him.
Yeah.
You shared with us a candle, and as you talk about his personality, and you hoped that he was received in a certain way, somebody had left a box of candles on your doorstep that had, different pictures of your son that they had downloaded. So you also got to see him through their eyes, which I find, just so comforting, for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's amazing. And then the call, can you tell me again the walk, the miracle walk?
Oh, the walk, the fundraiser that we do?
The walk on the...
the honor walk.
The honor walk.
Honor walk.
Goodness.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It's beautiful.
2 floors.
We have been present for other friends who unfortunately have had to walk their son. And there is a powerful... That's not the right word. In the moment, I was not emotional. I mean, in my memory, when I go back there and I can see the people, I can't always see the faces, but I can see all of those who showed up, and the experience of love in that moment still sits with me today. And it was the same with the funeral. So if anybody who was there is listening, your presence is still great. Appreciated.
Yeah. What you're doing for so many people that have experienced grief by sharing your story is helping and healing other people as well that are listening right now families that are listening right now, families who have lost a loved one, perhaps a child. It's just remarkable that you have the strength to come on here and you've shared with us full circle everything, not only about your son, about your incredible charity that you're working with, and I just love that you're doing so much for those dogs, the canines and that organization, but also for others. You know, you sharing your story really does help, and that's why we put this podcast together.
Yeah, it was hard. It didn't seem hard in the moment. And Kelly asked me, I was like, sure, I'll do that. And then as the days got closer, I was like, what was I thinking?
But I think I want to go back to that word capacity.
Yeah.
For you to be sitting here telling your story, and this is fairly recent.
19 months. Yeah. I think that what I tell myself is exactly what we talked about outside, which is these are, as Glennon Doyle says, these are the hard things. Really, there's no appropriate description for the experience of sharing your grief story. There's not. There are words you could wrap around it, but they will all fail in comparison to the inner experience of it. And so if being able to share the story lets somebody else feel a sense of connection or seen or anything that builds their own potential for hope. I've sort of shied away from the word healing because I feel like this wound is never going to heal. But that doesn't mean that I live without hope. I have to have hope. It is the only thing. Yes. Besides my husband.
Keeps you going.
Sure.
But Katie, you also mentioned outside when the word forgiveness. I want to go there for a second.
Yeah.
If we can. You mentioned forgiveness is this, I think it was a loose term. Or Can you go, I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, no.
Can you go into that a little bit of what you were mentioning there? I think it was very profound.
Yeah. So this for me is not about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not for me to give. In the experience of this accident, that driver has to find his own forgiveness. And I'm not sure if that's where you were going with this, but forgiveness is for ourselves. We are the only ones who have control over that emotional experience. And I don't have the space for anger and resentment. Based on our life experience, I don't know how much time I have here, right? I am not going to spend it in anger and resentment. And so I have to do the hard work to create forgiveness, to release that anger, and allow somebody else the space to find their own forgiveness. Does that make any sense?
It makes sense.
Yes.
It really does. And it's actually you being conflicted and complicated at the same time, which is understandable to anybody that's listening right now. But the good news, and I always look for something, the light. You said hope. I have to have the hope. But you also, forgiveness is, I need to forgive myself. There are people that need to forgive themselves so they can feel that sense of freedom.
Yeah, and I think, here's what I think when I say forgive, when people have to forgive themselves, I think that forgiveness, whether we are finding it in relation to how we feel about another person or how we feel about something that's taken place within us, I believe that forgiveness is the greatest act of self-compassion that you can give for yourself.
Let's put that on a shirt right now because we'll sell millions.
And it's interesting that you just said that. It's such a struggle for most of us because we're so hard on ourselves. But if we can give it to someone else, then we have it for ourselves as well. Yeah. But that's really, I love what you just said.
if we can give it to ourselves first, then we have more capacity to give it to somebody else. Because again, it comes down to compassion, and we only build compassion if we've healed our own suffering, or if we've learned how to navigate our own suffering.
So you just answered it, but I'm going to ask you to answer it in a different way. What do you think the barriers are for people that are unable to forgive, or they have an unwillingness to forgive?
Yeah, I think there's several different headlines for that one, or layers or headlines or whatever. And I think one is, I think one of the barriers of forgiveness is this desire to blame and to be able to point a finger at something. If I can point a finger at something else, then I don't have to take responsibility for it. You know, and that's one thing. That's outside the realm of what I'm talking about with my son's experience. But I think in one part of life, there's that. Somebody did me wrong, and I am going to hold on to that blame, because then I don't have to deal with what it takes for me to go on from that. And then I think there is a barrier of, when it comes to self-forgiveness, self-compassion, our world is so perfectionistic. And we've done this thing where we've flipped so that we look at love and belonging as something that we can see. And I think that's where that perfectionistic stuff comes in, and we keep saying, but I have to be there. If I am worthy of love and belonging, then it means I've checked all these boxes. And I think that keeps people from doing the real inner work to find love and belonging in themselves first. Does that make sense?
Oh,
and
totally.
I think that's a big barrier
Absolutely.
for self-forgiveness. I can't I'm trying to think of an example, but like, you know, it can't be okay that I'm, you know, I don't know, that I don't like my body or whatever it is. I have to fix that in order to be here. And that's just not true. You know, it's just not true. So I think that's another barrier. And then another barrier is, I think there's a sense of control that can come from not forgiving. And I think maybe it still goes back to that same first point of, and sometimes it's just too hard. It is just the grievance, the suffering is so heavy that we can't even see forgiveness yet. We're not even there. We have so much work to do on this other place that this idea of forgiveness is like, I don't even have to think about that right now. It's not part of my world.
Right. And I think there's one other that people just don't know how to get started.
Yes. Yes.
Which I think is for a lot of people that want to forgive, they just don't know how to get started, which is why we are here and why we've developed this.
Yes.
Before we go any further, I want to just say thank you for your story and sharing your grief. How can we find out more about your fundraiser?
Yes.
And that people want to reach out to?
Yes. So we're heading into the third annual Paul Chaney Fitness Fundraiser this year on June 22nd. I know that Michelle from Casey Paws has already gotten the Eventbrite page up, and we're working. Eventually, we will unveil a website and some other things, but we're allowing that to take its own time. So she's got the Eventbrite page up. I don't have a scan code for it, but I'll get one to you guys, maybe. And then, so they can do that. We have Facebook. We have Instagram that we're just starting to push on those today. We have grown it this year, so it's not just the fitness event anymore. So the first year we did it, we had just some fitness events. We were just sort of throwing things together. The second year we did it, we added some more fun things like a jump rope contest and a plank contest and a water balloon throwing contest and other things that were just fun in the middle of all this other stuff. And this year we have all the fitness stuff. We'll have a deadlift contest, a bench press, a pull up. We'll also have the plank contest, and some other things as well.
Yeah.
Let's go.
And then
Get started on your training regime.
A spin class contest. Let's get into that.
And it all takes place at the Foundation Westport. We are also adding a 5K this year.
Oh, great.
So we're doing a 5K walk run, and that will take place starting and ending at the foundation and go through the Roanoke neighborhood and park. So I would say the best way to get information is to check out the Eventbrite page, to check out our Facebook, because we'll start putting a lot more stuff on Facebook, and hopefully we've gotten media coverage in the past, and hopefully we'll have that same media coverage again.
Great. And you get us that information. We'll put it on our website.
Awesome.
At timeforforgiveness.org.
Yes. Great.
Katie, we appreciate you so much, and we're sending you all of our love.
I have one more thing on forgiveness that I remembered as you were talking,
Yes.
and that is one of the things I said outside is I feel like our culture has turned forgiveness into a word. And it's something that we say instead of something that we do. And I think forgiveness is actually something that it's an internal response. It's something you have to do. It's an action. It's something we have to actively do. And I think, like you were saying, there is a barrier in that now. We've sort of become desensitized. And so I think that's another thing.
As we close, there's something with my own personal experience with grief. I do believe that there is a learning period to learn to live moving forward with it. And I think everybody someday is going to need to understand that, because it's going to happen to everyone. And I have learned that not everything is permanent. And so it has given me a different perspective of how I live my life. And I was somebody before my loss, and I will never be that same person ever again. That's right. And I'm just curious who that person looks like for you.
I just actually was doing a lot of writing around this, which is, I will never be who I was before. And grief is, the grief that I've experienced, that my husband and I experience, our family. It is only one. Grief is in our life every day, right? And for us, we have to begin to rebuild something or build something from this point forward. But like you said, everybody's dealing with grief all the time at different levels. We have the little, they call it big T trauma and little T trauma. Well, we also have like little G grief and big G grief and all of these things. And we have to figure out how we navigate life with that. And our therapist uses a really great word that makes a lot of sense to me, because I can't use the words. I don't like saying moving forward, or they don't make sense to me in my nervous system. But he uses the word integrate. So I'm working on learning how to integrate this grief into who I am today. And a lot of that is a fundraiser. A lot of it is, I'm not the same. I'm a life coach, and I'm not the same life coach I was 2 years ago. You can't be. You can't have this experience. You know this. You can't be that same anymore. My life experience has changed. But you know what? We're also not the same person from one day to the next, with or without grief, hopefully. Right? Hopefully we grow from one day to the next,
I love that word, integrate.
I do. A lot of words today.
So much sense to me.
Integrate. We've learned so much. Katie Chaney, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm Sean Parr. For Bob and Kelly Pascuzzi, we'll see you next time on Time for Forgiveness. What a blessed day it was.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening and for watching Time for Forgiveness. Hey, listen, visit our website at timeforforgiveness.org. And here's the great news. You can now download our workbook. Just click on the QR code. It's that simple. You can also message us on our website, because we read every single message, and we certainly love to help. You can also reach us on our socials on Instagram and Facebook, and you can email us, again, at info@timeforforgiveness.org. I'm Sean Parr. For Bob and Kelly Pascuzzi, we'll see you next time on Time for Forgiveness.